honestly, some of these stories that you tend to hear out here are literally only made for Americans. Take, for example, this one. So, a Florida couple that were nabbed for a license violation were apparently trying to, or at least had sex, in a police patrol car. And the reason for doing this, even though they were actually caught by cops, was because they were trying to get content for OnlyFans. Americans, is everything okay out there? Are you sure y'all aren't going mad? Like, I just want to check up on you guys. I want to make sure that you guys are doing pretty all right, because this is a little much, don't you think?
Get ready for the battle of the sexes.
So, according to a Florida Highway Patrol trooper, he said that the couple, who comprised of a woman known as Summer Watkins and a man called Jordan Now, both of them 24, engaged in sexual activity after being placed in a patrol car when Noah was pulled over for driving with a suspended license early on Thursday. Now, this was Thursday of last week. So, apparently, while they were in the police car, Summer Watkins, the lady, told Jordan Now, the man, and I quote, "Baby, we should record an OnlyFans video back here." End quote. Minutes before the couple began to have oral sex, according to an arrest report statement from Trooper J.D. Perez Morales. I'm not going to continue because most of this is just, what they ended up being charged with. But honestly, I can get that we're all content creators and we're looking for content in any and all ways, especially shit that'll properly sell. But don't we think that maybe this is going a little too far? Yes, maybe you could say OnlyFans in and of itself is going too far, especially with the amount of porn that's out there. But if you're doing it in a police car, I think maybe you should try and consider the variables at play. I don't know, maybe it's just me. You can tell me if I'm wrong. Maybe you can ask the state trooper or, the cop that's there, if he'd like to be a part of it. More so the cameraman. Although, it would probably be better if he's one of the participants so that, you can have something to blackmail him with. And, most guys aren't ready to be a cameraman to two people that are fucking. Most of them want to take part in it, but I can understand maybe if he's married and, he just wants to help, grow content for a fee or some shit. So maybe they should have included him. That probably would have been a much better story. Because imagine him being the cameraman and, they don't show the number on the state trooper vehicle. And then right after they're done, he can arrest them and then take them for charging and, they can go and file their misdemeanor charges and shit. And then they can come back out and they can split the profits with this guy. Otherwise, this guy will just have a video which he can upload onto the internet, which will also definitely get him, a couple of views and he can make money from that shit. I see that as a proper win-win. But you choose to cut out the main middleman out of all of this? That's a very, very dumb move. Although, then again, maybe they're not into threesomes. But that said, it's unfortunate that they got caught because I'd have probably wanted to include the cop, especially if it was a female one. But anyways, let me not let my imagination run too wild because we do have a podcast to start, and I usually don't mind cuffing mine up with an instrumental when I usually start by saying, "Welcome to Breaktime on Westside, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who does not mind being cuffed unless, and I mean unless, we are going to a police cell. Then that's a problem. If it's BDSM, then, we can negotiate on that shit. He's a man who once believed that bukkake was a Japanese form of martial arts. It is none other than your tall, dark-haired, mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show is Battle of the Sexes, our weekly love, sex, and relationships show, where I come in to talk about stuff that relates to relationships, fucking, and marriage. And then, I get to debate with people who like talking about relationships, fucking, and marriage. And then we don't agree on some things. And sometimes we can disagree for a very long time. But usually we get to come to a conclusion. So if there is something that you would like us to talk about in that realm, then on IG it is at Breaktime on Westside. On Facebook it is also at Breaktime on Westside. And on Twitter you can slide into my personal DMs, which is at Bagaka the D. The DMs are always open and I am always ready and willing to take in new stories and new critical things that you would like us to discuss. But that said, we should probably move it on. But before we move on to our main topic of today, I want us to discuss a man known as Justin Baldoni for a little bit. Now, up until a couple of days ago, I didn't really know jack shit about this guy, but he is an American actor, director, and filmmaker, and he is best known for portraying Rafael Solano on the CW series known as Jane the Virgin, as well as directing other films that I don't really know about. Now, this man also happens to have a podcast known as the Man Enough Podcast, and he seems to sound like, he's appealing to women, even though he's calling it the Man Enough Podcast, because there was something that he said, or at least there was a clip that I got to hear of him, which I found to be particularly intriguing. I'm going to play it for you guys, then I'm going to discuss it for a little bit, because this was something that I found to be particularly interesting. So let me play for you the clip, then we can discuss what's there at length. So here it is.
If you are a man who's truly confident, not the false confidence, the bravado, the performative confidence, but if you're truly confident as a man, you want a strong, powerful, badass woman.
Absolutely.
You don't need to dim her light, because her light reflects back to you.
All right, so let's go through exactly what he said. He said, a truly confident man, not any one of those, bravado types, a truly confident man chooses to have a strong, powerful woman, because you won't dim her light, but, it reflects upon you and so on and so forth. Okay, all right. What can I say about this? First of all, it's unfortunate that he decided to put each and every properly confident man in a box. He's making it seem as though all confident men should look for a strong, powerful, badass woman, and I think that's more wrong than right, because just the same way people like to say, so and so is different, all women are different, men are different, blah blah blah. This is the time why I come and I say, what, confident guys are different. And yes, maybe he feels this way, and if that's something that you'd want to do, then it's entirely up to you. But don't go and group every single quote-unquote truly confident man in there simply because you're trying to justify, being with a strong, powerful, badass woman. I think people usually take the idea that we want a submissive, humble woman to mean that we want somebody that we can step on, that we can kind of, dominate with an iron fist and shit. And, when we tell her to jump, she didn't even ask how high. She jumps as she's asking, baby, is this high enough for you? And I think this is more exception than the rule with a lot of us quote-unquote confident guys. And I think if anything, this probably will appeal more to women than to guys, because it sounds nicer for women to hear, as opposed to what guys essentially look for and try to look for in a babe and would want to resonate with. Or maybe I'm wrong about it, but this I don't know, I feel like they've got it all wrong, because I think I'd probably use other terminologies like, say, hardworking, proactive, rather than strong, powerful. But unfortunately, because of the sake of time, I can't fully break this down, because I'd have gone deep into this entire thing, but unfortunately because of time I can't exactly do that, because that's the main topic. But what I will do is I'll make sure that next week's topic is this. This will be the main topic of next week, just so that I can break this down, because I feel like people are getting it wrong. And I feel like this is some quote-unquote woke person that's busy trying to feed us, possibly misleading information. But that I will handle next week. So for now, I will move it on. So on to our main topic of this episode. And if you kind of have paid attention to how I have been doing the podcast over the past, year or so, I've been very into culture, and I have been very pro-marriage. I think I'm probably one of the male podcasters. I feel like I'm probably one of the few urban podcasters that speaks for marriage. Maybe I'm just overstepping here. but I feel like there's a lot more people that have been speaking against marriage and against the idea of marriage, particularly in relation to guys. And I spoke for marriage not too long ago, probably about a year ago, and I feel like, a community, as listeners, I feel like we've all grown a little bit over the past year. So how about I actually go and revisit the idea of whether we probably should still get married, whether we probably should still look at the idea of marriage, and whether, it's a good thing or a bad thing. Because I still see a lot of people talking about how nowadays marriage is a scam. Marriage isn't worth it these days. Oh, you shouldn't get married. And weirdly enough, some of the people that even say that for some reason are married or were married. So they might sound like they're a little, bitter about something. But now let's go back to the entire talk of marriage. A lot of people usually speak against marriage. And for some reason, it's like people nowadays are a lot less likely to get married. Like statistically, it's actually being proven that fewer people are getting married today, fewer people are choosing to get married today, and the divorce rates are still existively there, and people are still getting separated and divorced and shit. So maybe people are starting to see marriage for what it is, and they actually are stepping out. That could be the case for some people, and I do think a lot of people do feel that way. But I feel as though maybe we need to revisit the idea of marriage instead of getting done with it completely, because I think what most people are doing nowadays is getting rid of it completely. And while I have my thoughts, I can accept maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because I haven't been married, I wouldn't know what it's like. Maybe because I haven't gone through a lot of what people have gone through in their marriages, then maybe I wouldn't understand. So yes, maybe I'm the one who is totally unaware of this and speaking speculatively. And maybe on my side, I feel like what we need to do is adjust the parameters instead of doing away with the entire thing. I think marriage in and of itself does need to evolve to a certain stage. Because when you kind of look at the entire premise of, marriage is a scam, people shouldn't be getting married today, it's not even worth it, especially for guys. And that's something that a lot of the people in the red pill community usually talk about. Like, you can listen to them say that, but usually when you start asking some of the questions, not just to the red pill community, but even to like the wider reach of guys and even women, usually they more or less come up with roughly similar answers. And the first one that you hear about is everyone cheats. Nowadays everyone's cheating, and this person cheats with this person. You think your person's faithful up until you realize that you cheated with them, or you might find that your kid isn't entirely yours. And I've dealt with stories like that before. Like hell, last week's story was already bad enough as is, but if you were to use that, then aren't you, one, grouping everyone into a bubble, kind of the same issue that I had before I moved on to the main topic, and two, aren't you passing judgment before the mistake has even been committed in the first place? Like, it's not good to do that, because you're pretty much just making the presumption that, the moment I get married and somebody feels, unhappy, then they're most definitely going to cheat on me. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever think of that as a possibility. I think you thinking that there is no way whatsoever in this world that my person would ever cheat on me could be playing a little into the naive side. Like, that's just me who feels that way. You can have your thoughts on it. If that's how you want to believe in your partner, then by all means, all well and good. But the belief that your partner or your partners or your future partner will cheat, not could, not may, will cheat. Like, the moment you make it a will, makes it such that it's an inevitability rather than a possibility. And I think that's a fairly negative way of thinking of it, which I'm not going to lie, there's a lot of people that fuck around nowadays. Like, I'm not defending anyone. there's a lot of people that cheat in this day and age, and a lot of times people don't even know about it. Both sides do not know that the other person is cheating, and it's something that happens a lot. But I'm not saying that just because it happens a lot that it's inevitable for everyone. Like, a lot of people loved Game of Thrones. It doesn't mean that all of us enjoyed it. Well, I also haven't really watched it per se, but it's entirely subjective. There's people that liked it, there's people that didn't. Not everyone loves Beyonce. Not everyone agrees with Barack Obama. And these are people that are universally liked and loved by a lot of people. But to say that there's no one that will go against that, I think that's selling human beings in general short. Because the fact that we can have our own different beliefs and different opinions and shit is what should mean that it's probably better if you find out, rather than you simply just believe that everyone is going to cheat and then pretty much write each and every person from the opposite sex off of the idea of moving to the next stage of life. Then now there's the second reason that usually comes in, and it's something that I hear a lot nowadays from people, and it's like people don't have a lot of love for each other anymore. People don't love each other. There's people that talk about the whole idea of, I want somebody that I can spend the rest of my days with and we can love each other unconditionally the entire time, which I'm gonna be honest with you is bullshit from the start. Like, the belief that you guys will love each other each and every day of your lives when you're married and it'll be all bliss and it'll end up going down like a Disney fairy tale, I think that's absolute bullshit. And it's a fairy tale that's been sold to you ever since, I think it was maybe the 80s or the 2000s. The way Hollywood's been booming with that shit, it's sold the ideal, and it's made people think that is a reality, which isn't true. A lot of married people who've been married for a long time talk about how the love ends. That feeling that you have for each other, that shit ends, and it becomes more about the partnership and the companionship and shit. And obviously, since I'm saying this speculatively speaking, you can take it with a pinch of salt. But for the most part, if you look at marriage from way back in the day, it was never about love. It just started becoming about love, I think, this past maybe 20, 30, 40 years, maybe 50 at the most ago. Like, if you look at when people were getting married, even before like civilizations were set up, it was nature's way of continuing the species and making it stronger and move better. So better selection of mates based on genetics and abilities and so on, and that was what was there. Then you move on to the more modern day civilizations, and there were lifetime transactions. People would get married so that they can bond two families together and grow together. It's something that a lot of people still believe in right now. And it's been a pretty big part of the reason why arranged marriages have been and still remain a thing for quite a lot of people today. So in and of that, that's an absolutely bullshit way to look at marriage. Although the least bullshit way to look at marriage is actually the one where a lot of red pill people talk about, and it's something that I've heard YouTubers Abba and Preach talk about, where they say that it's pretty much a man's way of betting that you will stay together forever, and he's betting half of all of his shit, which I will agree is totally and completely true. It is more or less that. And yes, with the way a lot of divorces do tend to go down, 98% of the time, it's the man that's usually giving a lot of his chunk of the wealth. And while a lot of us guys will say this and will resonate with this, to the damn core and everything, there's also what the women will come out and say, because they'll be like, oh, in a marriage, it's the guy that tends to benefit more from this. Like, this was something that I was actually having a discussion with a couple of my workmates about, and that was something that one of the married ladies was saying. She was like, oh, the man gets to benefit more in a marriage. He can go out and he can work and he can come back home and he can pretty much just chill, put his legs up and let his woman do everything. And there were other reasons and shit. And it does look like that's the case, but at the same time, I think guys also stand to put in a lot of work. It's just that a lot more of their work is required to be done out of the house, not inside of the house. But besides that tiny bit, obviously the whole betting half your shit, like that's something that I do think genuinely needs to be looked at, and I can't exactly fight it as such. The only way that you can probably ensure that this doesn't become a problem is if you actually stay together, which, it's a pretty huge gamble, to be honest. But all of that said, like, if you were to use any or all of this to justify not getting married, then I'd probably come up to you and I'd ask you probably one or two questions. And the first one is, if marriage is such a scam, if marriage isn't something that we should really be looking forward to, then why is it that huge chunks of the LGBT community have continuously fought and continue fighting a lot of political leaders, a lot of world rules and constitutions and shit, so that they can get legalized to actually marry in a lot of these different countries? Why is it that people are advocating for marriage of the LGBT community? Like, why are people fighting so hard for that? Like, if it was such a scam, why would people go and fight to actually get married, get persecuted, sometimes even risk prison time and shit? Why would they fight that hard for an entire community to have the access to marriage if it was such a scam? So maybe now I can also ask the second question. Is it that marriage is the problem, or is it the people that we're marrying that are the problem? Because I see marriage as a contractual agreement. Maybe we need to adjust it, but are we saying that it's bad in and of itself? Probably not. It's kind of the same way people usually talk about record label deals nowadays, and that, like, those things are like a prison for you, and it's bad for artists. But because of those record label deals, a lot of people have managed to succeed, and some people might not succeed or might not have succeeded if they didn't get the record deal. So is it that the deal is the problem, or is it the people on the other ends of the table, or on both ends of the table, that are the problem? So that in and of itself should probably set the stage for whether marriage is actually a good thing or a bad thing. Because the way I see it, after doing this podcast for almost 2.5 years right about now, and watching Oloni's stories this morning, marriage isn't entirely good. But at the same time, while people are rushing to write it off, I don't think it's entirely bad. Honestly, I feel like marriage does have its flaws right now. Like, for the kind of time that we live in, and for the kind of demands that we have right now in the household, in our work life, just generally in our lives in the 21st century right now, before the metaverse kicks in and shit, I feel like, just as me and Maurice were saying in Sex and the Shitty, I think it was part 2, marriage isn't bad, but it definitely does need to evolve. Because we've stuck to a lot of more or less the same exact principles for the past, hundreds or even thousands of years, and maybe we need to start adjusting things. Maybe we need to start looking at different parameters. Maybe, the open marriage might need to be embraced a little bit more. Maybe people need to start taking a little bit more accountability, and people need to start checking themselves every so often. And maybe we need to start treating this whole marriage thing like an actual contract and start giving it timelines, so that at least we can become a little bit more accountable to each other, and, check back in with each other every so often, and still ask each other, do you still want to be in this marriage? Is this something that you'd like to be a part of and shit? That way, I think more and more people will do things a little bit more intentionally, rather than just, go get married, expect bliss, and then suddenly feel like shit or start pulling some stupid shit simply because things didn't go as planned and they suddenly felt like they got a better offer elsewhere. Although, then again, I might be wrong about this, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open on IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. On Facebook, it is also at Breaktime on Westside. And on Twitter, you can slide into my personal DMs, which is at BagakaTheD. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end. And if you are listening through Castbox, feel free to drop your thoughts and comments below, and I will attend to them accordingly. If you are listening through an app that allows for ratings and reviews, a rating and or review will be appreciated greatly. And I will catch you guys on the next break.